بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم تر كيف ضرب الله مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
As much as we, as the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as much as we love Allah and we worship Him, and our lives revolve around the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the hope that we have in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is nothing as fallible, helpless human beings as we are, we can produce in order to thank Him. Not our sayings, nor our actions. Anytime we find ourselves thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is not enough. Anytime we find ourselves trying to describe the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is inadequate. And thus when we supplicate to Allah, we refer to the supplications which are produced by people who recognized Allah, people who understood Him, people who lived every second of their lives for Allah. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says to Imam Ali alayhi salam, Ya Ali, ma arafa Allah illa ana wa ant. Oh Ali, nobody recognizes the true nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except me and you. And of course, this includes the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, which came after Amir al-Mu'mineen, because they inherited his every attribute, just as they inherited the attributes of the Prophet himself. Only when one recognizes someone, he is able to address him properly. So we say the same when it comes to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Only those who truly recognize Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they were able to address him, they were able to speak to him adequately. And those were none other than the Imams of Ahlul Bayt who came after him. And that's why when people wanted to visit Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when they wanted to perform the ziyarah, they would first go, the companions of course, they would first go to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. They would say, we are intending on visiting your grandfather Hussein. For many people it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. They would have to travel months. They would have to travel months in advance. They would have to plan months in advance. Some of them risked everything. Their wealth, their health, their well-being. There came a time, just so we know how privileged we are and honored we are living in this time to be able to visit Imam Hussein with such ease. There came a time when people would have to lose their limbs as a price for visiting Imam Hussein. People who would visit Imam Hussein would have an arm severed or a leg severed every single time they went. Until you found people who had no limbs. they kept visiting Imam Hussein year after year. And they paid the hefty price. People would crawl to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. During the time of Al-Mutawakkil al-Abbasi, one of the Khulafa who had the most animosity and hatred for Ahlul Bayt. A man who in his 17 years of rule tried to destroy the grave of Imam Hussein almost 20 times. And in one time he tried to flood the grave of Imam Hussein. He redirected the river of Euphrates in order to try to flood the grave of Imam Hussein, so that there would be nothing there. There would be nothing there for pilgrims to come and visit. And when the water reached the grave of Imam Hussein, it began to circle around and pass through. And this circulation is referred to as, in the Arabic language, as al-ha'ir. And this is why we refer to it as al-ha'ir al-Hussein, where the water circled around, the area which the water did not penetrate through. And the grave of Imam Hussein stayed for centuries and centuries, and will stay, inshallah, for centuries for people to go. So going back to this, people would come to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Al-Imam al-Sadiq, Al-Imam al-Kadhim, Al-Imam al-Baqir, Al-Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, and they would seek permission and seek advice from the Imams. We are going to seek the ziyarah of your grandfather, Sayyid al-Shuhada, Abi Abdullah. Every time they would come, the Imams, who themselves were not privileged enough to always visit Imam Hussein, they would tell them, if you arrive in Karbala, do the following. Perform ghusl, enter in a certain manner, in a certain mode, and then recite the following ziyarah. The ziyarat which we have, which are narrated in Mafatih al-Jinan and other books of dua, other books of supplication. All of these are narrated from whom? The Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Most of them are narrated from our sixth Imam, Al-Imam al-Sadiq, because at that time it was a time of ease. People were able to access the grave of Imam Hussein as opposed to the times which came after him, during the time of the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th Imams, when people were not allowed to visit anymore. People did not have the privilege. But during the time of the 6th Imam, people had the privilege of visiting Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So most of our ziyarats come from him. And the Imam was so eloquent in addressing his father, his grandfather. In one place he says, أشهد لقد اقشعرت لدمائكم أظلة العرش. I bear witness that the Arsh, the celestial realm, where the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rests, it shakes at the sight of your blood. Our 12th Imam, Al-Imam al-Hujjah, Ajjallah ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, he so eloquently describes the maqtal, what took place on the day of Ashura. He describes what the woman of Imam Hussein alayhi salam did when they saw the sight of Shimr ibn al-Jawshan sit upon the chest of Imam Hussein. What happened? So eloquently he describes. And later on he says, وَلَأَنْدُبَنَّكَ صَبَاحًا وَمَسَاءً وَلَأَبْكِيَنَّ عَلَيْكَ بَدَلَ الدُّمُوعِ دَمًا. I will cry morning and night for you, Ya Hussein. I will shed tears of blood for you, Ya Hussein. These were the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, people who recognized him. People who recognized who their grandfather was. When they addressed him, they did so knowing exactly what he stood for. Not coincidentally, they would walk in and put a few words together, and this would be a ziyarah. Every single word in the ziyarah is chosen carefully. And some of the most eloquent supplications. Imam Hussein alayhi salam bore qualities that no other person on the face of this planet did. And that's why when the Imams of Ahlul Bayt addressed their grandfather, Imam Hussein, they gave him certain attributes. These attributes are not mentioned in the supplications, the ziyarat of other Imams of Ahlul Bayt. For instance, when we read ziyarat Warith or ziyarat Ashura, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam Safwatillah, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuh Nabiyillah, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Ibrahim, ya waritha Nuh, ya waritha Isa, ya waritha إسماعيل يا وارث محمد صلوا على محمد
اللهم صل على
The word warith, inheritor. We don't say this when we visit Amir al-Mu'mineen, nor when we visit Imam Hassan, nor when we visit the Imams in Al-Baqi', nor Imam Al-Kadhim or Imam Al-Rida. Al-Warith, an attribute which is specific and exclusive to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Now, why do they refer to him as Warith? First of all, we say this, that it is out of the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that in every time of existence there shall be a manifestation of Allah on earth. There shall be a representation of Allah on earth. إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah number 30. I have created, truly, verily I have created a Khalifa, a representative. A representative of whom? There were no human beings who existed before that time. God is speaking of himself. A representative, a manifestation of myself, he says to the angels. We believe that in every time there must exist a Khalifa, a representative. And when there was only one human being, he was the Khalifa. And when there were only two human beings on earth, Adam and Hawa, one of them was a Khalifa. And when there were only four, one of them was a Khalifa. And this continued all throughout the ages, through all the prophets, through the Imams, through our own Prophet, and through the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. There must be a representation. There must be a person who inherits the message of the prophets, which is the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we address the Imam as the inheritor, not only is he the physical inheritor, by the way, we believe that the Imam is also the physical inheritor of the prophets which came before him. The Quran tells us about inheritance from one prophet to another. وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانَ دَاوُودَ. That Sulaiman inherited his father Dawood. يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. To Yahya about Zakaria, he says that he shall take inheritance from me. يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. And Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, when she stood in front of those who took her rights away from her, the land of Fadak, she mentioned these verses, that the prophets in fact do give inheritance. They turned to her and they said, Ya Fatima, the prophets do not give inheritance. She used the verses of the Quran as a proof that the prophets do give inheritance. And according to our ahadith, that the Imams are the natural inheritors of the prophets, physically, what the prophets leave behind, even their wealth that they leave behind. And this is why we have it in our ahadith again, that when the 12th Imam, Al-Imam al-Hujjah, reappears, he will bring with him not only the message he will bring, but he shall also bring what he has inherited from his fathers. The sword of Rasulullah, the sword of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the shield of Rasulullah. All of these will be in his possession. Tabut Bani Israel, the Ark of Bani Israel, all of it will be in his possession. Why? Because number one, he is the literal inheritor. He inherits them physically. And number two, he is, just as his fathers before him, the inheritor of the message. There has to be a natural extension. And this is why we say, As-salamu alayka ya waritha Adam. You are the inheritor of the message of Adam, and the message of Ibrahim, and the message of Musa, and the message of Isa, and the message of Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. And you find that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, from the day that he was born, he was fashioned and he was molded into delivering the message of his grandfather. It was not by coincidence. It was not by coincidence that there was no one else to fight Yazid, so the Imam saw it incumbent upon himself to fight Yazid. He was there in order to deliver the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he is the natural inheritor of the Prophet and the Imams which came before him. This is because we believe that attributes can be inherited. In Surah Nuh, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Nuh speaks to Allah, he says, وَقَالَ نُوحٌ رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ دَيَّارًا إنك إن تذرهم يضل عبادك ولا يلد إلا فاجرا كفارا. Oh Allah, if you destroy these people, do not leave anybody behind. For if you are to leave these people behind, they shall give birth to nothing but disbelievers. This verse tells us that even disbelief can be inherited from father to son. So not only physical attributes are inherited, attributes such as disbelief are also inherited. And that's why when we refer to Imam Hussein as the warith, the inheritor, not only did he inherit the physical attributes of his grandfather, Rasulullah, and the physical attributes of his father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, but also he inherited the attributes which made him the greatest candidate to serve the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. And this is what we mean when we say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam wa safwatillah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuhin nabiyillah. Attributes are very important and they are inherited. And this is why Islam tells us that when we choose a spouse, when we choose somebody who we are going to share our life with and produce a family and produce children, to not choose that person just from what your desire wants, from what your heart. The Prophet says, اختاروا لنطفكم فإن العرق دساس. Literally, choose your repository. Choose where you are going to plant your seed. Choose the person who is going to be a father to your children or a mother to your children. Because in the same way that physical characteristics are passed down, there are other characteristics which are also passed down and inherited. And if the fathers are disbelievers, there's a hard chance for the son to become a believer. That's why you choose the right spouse. And the greatest candidate to deliver the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth was Imam Hussein alayhi salam himself. He was the closest person to the Prophet. He was the closest person to his father and his mother. And this is why we seek closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from him. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. Do you not see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you an example, كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ, of a blessed tree. Who does this blessed tree refer to? If the cursed tree refers to Banu Umayyah, and the impure tree refers to Banu Umayyah, who does the blessed tree refer to? Naturally, Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So number one, we find this. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam safwatillah. This is one of the attributes in the ziyarat which is exclusive to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. An exclusive attribute of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Number two, the second thing which is exclusive to the supplications of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is something which is rather controversial today. And that is the existence of la'an, cursing. Now what is cursing? Some people, even among the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, for them this issue is taboo. And some people abandon the ziyarah of Imam Hussein, which includes la'an. This is because they have misunderstood the essence of la'an. وَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً قَتَلَتْ وَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً ظَلَمَتْ وَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً سَمِعَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ. What is la'an? How do we translate the word la'an? First of all, la'an is not profanity. La'an is something completely different. Using foul language, that is not la'an. Number two, la'an, some people have chose to define it as cursing. It's not cursing either. The essence of la'an is when you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove His mercy from somebody, for something that they have done. When we define it properly, we begin to see the bigger picture. That, oh Allah, for the injustices that this person has committed, we ask that you remove your mercy from him. And la'an exists even in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that on the Day of Judgment, some people will stand in front of Him and they will curse the people who led them astray. قَالُوا رَبَّنَا إِنَّا. They say that we followed our commanders, we and followed our people and they led us astray. رَبَّنَا آتِهِمْ ضَعْفَيْنِ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ وَالْعَنْهُمْ لَعْنًا كَبِيرًا. Multiply their punishment and curse them, meaning move your mercy away from them. Do not have mercy on them, for they are the ones that led us astray. So number one, la'an is to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove His mercy from somebody. It's not profanity and it is not cursing. Number two, when the Imam, and again the authors of these ziyarat are whom? The Imams of Ahlul Bayt. When an Imam asks Allah to remove His mercy from someone, it's not because he has a grudge against this person. The Imams did not hold grudges. The Imams did not hate people for who they were, they hated their actions. And if they ever cursed a person, or if they ever condemned someone, it wasn't for who they were, it was for his actions. So when the Imam invokes the wrath of Allah upon somebody, he is telling that person, he is saying in essence that, oh Allah, remove your mercy from this person, not for who they are, for what they did. So number one, it is a removal of mercy. And number two, it is because of a person's actions. Not in order to satisfy your own anger. Remember, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt had no personal hatred towards anybody. Even if that person in themselves were evil, they had no personal hatred towards him. They had a hatred towards whom? And what? Their actions. So this is number two, the context of la'an, which exists exclusively in, for the most part, the ziyarah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And number three is the following. We find the following verse. أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدهمات ثيابها. What does it mean for Imam Hussein alayhi salam to be a nur, illumination? Ashhadu, I bear witness that you are a nur, you are an illumination. We say the following, and this comes in a very, very broad context, and we need to look at the bigger picture. Take the example of a tree. A tree, it begins its life process as what? A seed. And then the seed develops into a root. And then the root finally develops into a tree. And the tree is able to bear fruit. We say the following, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the prophets and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, He created them all from one light, from one nur, from one illumination. Meaning that they all manifested themselves after the initial creation of this nur, after the initial creation of this illumination. And this illumination is pure. And it can never be made impure. أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجسك الجاهلية. That the Jahiliyyah mentality, which represented evil could never manifest itself in this nur. It can never penetrate this illumination. And this is one meaning for infallibility. That all of the prophets which came before the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, since they were all created out of this nur, which in itself was pure, that none of them had sinned. None of them had sinned. They were all infallible. All of the prophets and all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, which all originated from this nur. Okay. Now, stage two. Now this nur, the seed, in our example, the seed which develops into the roots and then into the tree, the seed represents this initial illumination which was created. Now the seed develops into a root. The root is a second stage. It has the qualities of a tree, but it does not bear the fruit of the tree. If you want to take an example from a tree, if you want to take a specimen, you can take it from the root, correct? But the tree itself does not bear fruit. So this is the second stage. The second stage, which is the root, manifested itself in whom? The prophets, which came before the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Meaning that these prophets, they manifested the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, they did not bear fruit. when did they actually bear, when did the message of Islam actually bear fruit? When did it make a touchdown? When did it actually land? With the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein represented the fruit which was born of this seed and this root. أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها. And for this reason we say that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he manifested not only his own message, but the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was in him, and the message of the prophets, which came before him. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Meaning that Imam Hussein is of that very same nur, that very same initial illumination which was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to guide the people. ألم ترى كيف ضرب الله مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he represented this tree, this purified tree. And it is through the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam that we seek guidance, we seek illumination. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, although tonight we commemorate by dimming the lights and by lighting candles. Why? Because we are standing in solidarity with the woman on the night after the day of Ashura, when there were no lights. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he represents our lights, and he represents our illumination. And it is through him that we seek guidance, and it is through him that we seek closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will mention one more hadith before we go into the Masiba. What happened after the tragedy of Ashura? The verse in the Quran which states the following: Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, النبي أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم وأزواجه أمهاتهم. That the Prophet is closer and he is dearer to the believers than themselves. And this has to exist within us, brothers and sisters. This has to exist within us. The love for Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, more than we love our own selves. If people ask us why we lament and why we mourn and why are we in calamity and distress for the death of Imam Hussein and for the death of the martyrdom of the members of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, it is because that when we are born, from the day that we are born and when we are raised, we are taught to love the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam more than we love ourselves. And the calamities which befall us every day, we weep, we cry, when our family members are taken from us, when our friends are taken from us. But if we love Ahlul Bayt more than we love our own family members, then how should we lament them? And how should we mourn them? And how should we weep for them year after year? The Prophet is closer to the believers than themselves. Salim bin Qais al-Hilali narrates the following hadith. He narrates on the authority of Abdullah bin Ja'far. Abdullah bin Ja'far says that we were in the presence of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Myself, Abdullah, Al-Imam al-Hasan, Al-Imam al-Hussein, and a few more prominent companions. He says, فَجَرَى بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ مُعَاوِيَةَ حَدِيث. I began speaking to Muawiyah. So Abdullah says to Muawiyah, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يقول, I heard Rasulullah saying, أنا أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم. I am dearer to the believers than their own selves. And I am closer to the believers than their own selves. Abdullah bin Ja'far is saying, I heard the Prophet say this about himself. And then Abdullah bin Ja'far continues the hadith. And he says, the Prophet, وَمِن بَعْدِي, after I pass away, أَخِي عَلِيُّ بْنُ أَبِي طَالِبْ أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. After I pass away, my brother Ali ibn Abi Talib is closer to the believers than themselves. And after him comes his son Al-Hasan ibn Ali, أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. After him, Al-Husayn ibn Ali, أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. After him, Ali ibn al-Husayn, أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. After him, Muhammad ibn Ali, أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. The hadith continues to mention the names of all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. All of them Abdullah ibn Ja'far says, I heard the Prophet say, all of them are closer to the believers than themselves. After he was done with the hadith, Imam al-Hasan says, yes, and I also heard this from Rasulullah. And Imam Hussein says, yes, I also heard this from Rasulullah. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he was in their presence. He says, yes, I also heard this from Rasulullah. Umar ibn Salama, he says, yes, I also heard this from Rasulullah. Then the hadith goes back to Salim bin Qais al-Hilali, who narrates from Abdullah ibn Ja'far. He says that I turned to whom? Salman, Abu Dhar, and Al-Miqdad, three of the greatest companions. I asked them about the following hadith. All of them says, yes, we heard this from Rasulullah as well. That all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt are closer to the believers than themselves. And they represent the purified tree. And they represent the illumination. It is no wonder that us, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, we seek illumination and guidance from the Prophet and from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. But it is on a night like this, brothers and sisters, when the enemy sought to extinguish this illumination. يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. Allah says that they, the unbelievers, they seek to extinguish the light, the nur which emanates, the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They try to extinguish this light. وَيَأْبَى اللَّهُ إِلَّا أَن يُتِمَّ نُورَهُ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, verily, He is adamant about establishing His light, about establishing His illumination. Every time they try to kill the memory of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, it livens up more. Every time they persecute the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, more followers are attracted to Ahlul Bayt. Every time they try to extinguish this flame, this burning desire that we have in our hearts, it grows more and it burns more and more. Every time they try to erase the memory of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, their memory holds in our hearts and our minds more and more. And it is on the day of Ashura where they try to extinguish the flame of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam by murdering Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his family. Brothers and sisters, on a night like this, after the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam had given their lives, after the family members of Banu Hashim had given their lives, after Imam Hussein alayhi salam had given his own life for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the enemy, they began to rejoice, they began to celebrate, they did not have enough. The first thing that they did, Ya Mu'mineen, was that they brought their horses out into the battlefield. These horses began to trample the bodies of Imam Hussein, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, Al-Qasim, who was only a young man at that time. They even trampled his body. They began to sever the heads of the men of Ahlul Bayt, and they raised them on top of the spears. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, he describes to us exactly what happened. One of the companions of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Abu Hamza Thumali, he turns to the Imam after seeing him weep for years and years. Our fourth Imam lived for 35 years after the day of Ashura, and he spent his days and his weeks and his months weeping for his father Hussein. Abu Hamza Thumali, he turns to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, al-qatlu lakum aadah wa karamatukum min Allah shahada. Death is not uncommon among you, and shahada, martyrdom, is a blessing that Allah has bestowed upon you. He says, Na'am shakar Allah sa'yaka ya Aba Hamza, ولكن يا أبا حمزة كلما نظرت إلى عماتي وأخواتي تذكرت فرارهن من خيمة إلى خيمة والمنادي ينادي أحرقوا بيوت الظالمين. He says, every time I remember, every time I look at my sisters, every time I look at my nieces and the daughters of Rasulullah, all I can remember is them running from one tent to another. All of the tents had been set on fire. The enemy said, أَخْرِقُوا بُيُوتَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Burn the homes of the oppressors. The orphans began running from side to side. It is said, Hamid ibn Muslim, he narrates the following. He narrates that the orphans of Imam Hussein began to run from side to side. And as we are mentioning the orphans, we will mention the following. that the orphans of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they did not want to drink water before the elders had drank water. It is said that two of the daughters of Imam al-Hassan, one of them named al-Hassan, the other named al-Hussein, were found hugging each other, and they had died, they had passed out and died because of their thirst. The orphans began to run from one place to another. One of the daughters of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Hamid ibn Muslim says, I saw her dress had caught on fire and she was running from one tent to another. When she saw me, she became afraid. She looked to me, she said, Ya Shaykh, anta lana am alayna? Ya Shaykh, are you with us or are you against us? He said, La lakum wa la alaykum. I am not for you, nor am I against you. She says, Ya Shaykh, hal qara'ata al-Quran? Oh Shaykh, have you read the Quran? He says, yes, I am familiar with these verses. She says, have you read the verse, وَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ? Have you read the verse which tells us to be gentle with the orphans? He says, yes, I am familiar with this verse. She says, أَنَا يَتِيمَةُ أَبِي عَبْدِ اللَّهِ الْحُسَيْنِ. I am the orphan of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He turns to her and he says, Ya Bunay, what are you doing here, oh girl? What are you doing running from one tent to another? She says, I'm looking for my family. Can you help me back, direct me back to my family? He tells her, where do you want to go? She points to An-Najaf al-Ashraf. She says that my grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib is buried there. And I have heard that anyone who goes to him and who requests something from him and he is heartbroken, the Imam will not turn him away. He turns to her, my dear girl, you cannot go to Najaf because it is a far distance. وَأَخْشَى عَلَيْكِ مِنْ حَوَافِرِ الْخَيْلِ. I am afraid that something will happen to you on the way. I cannot take you towards your grandfather. She turns to him. She says, Ya Shaykh, well in this case, if you cannot take me to my grandfather, then take me to my uncle Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. I want to return the favor. He went out to seek us water, but he did not come back. He had no water to bring back for us. And I want to go and repay him the favor by bringing water to him. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Brothers and sisters, let us recite this verse 5 times for those who are in need, those who are sick. And while you are remembering the ones who are sick, remember yourselves as well. Anything that you want. This Muharram season comes only once a year. Many of you are heartbroken. Many of you have shed tears for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The hadith says, كُلُّ عَيْنٍ بَاكِيَةٍ. On the day of judgment, every eye shall cry, every person shall weep, except the one who wept for Imam Hussein. Anything that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times of distress and at times of calamity, especially when we are seeking closeness to Him through Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it will be answered. So remember yourselves in dua as well. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات، إنك مجيب الدعوات، إنك قاضي الحاجات، إنك على كل شيء قدير. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.